there seemed to be a pretty big gap between all of this great research that was coming out from academics that was published in the academic journals that then didn't make it to the general public, didn't make it to knowledge that people could use and understand and say, well, this will make me select this particular food or feed my dog in this particular way.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast, where our mission is to share new and emerging information to the pet care industry to help us continually innovate and improve our products to support the health and well-being of dogs and cats. I'm here today with Dr. Linda Case, and I'm your host, Dr. Kate Shoveler from the University of Guelph. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Kate. It's great to be here.
Yes, nice to see you again. It's been a long time since we've been able to connect, and I'm very much looking forward to today's interview.
I am too.
I was hoping that maybe you could start by describing to the listener a little bit more about the business that you own, which is the Science Dog.
Sure, sure. I'd happy to do that. So, the science dog was basically an offshoot from my very first book. I'd written a number of textbooks when I was in academia and when I was working as a consultant, and I was also, of course, writing science writing for other scientists. And in the, gosh, I think 2012, I was also doing a lot of speaking at dog training conferences because I'm a dog trainer, and I kind of had an reputation of the dog trainer who does nutrition. And I was speaking at a conference about dog nutrition, and an editor of a small publishing company came up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to write a book about this stuff?" And so my first book into the popular press market was Dog Food Logic, and that was published in 2014. It was the very first book that I wrote, taking science and trying to make it palatable to dog folks and the consumer. And when I was publishing that book, my editor said, there's this thing called a blog that's becoming popular. You should write a blog to support the book. And at the time, I thought, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm a science writer. I don't know. So we decided to give it a try. And my husband and I, literally on a trip to Maine, we were in the car trying to come up with catchy names for this blog, and we came up with the Science Dog. So the Science Dog blog launched in 2013 and 2014, and its whole purpose is to take current research, and I pretty much cover primarily nutrition and then also behavior and social cognition in the dog and training, because again, those are our strong interests. And the blog became pretty popular. And then right before, this was serendipitous, right before COVID hit, we had found a platform. We'd wanted to do online teaching for a long time. But as you probably know, as an academic, the avenues for that were pretty limited. There was Coursera and EDX, but those were all platforms that were directed towards large corporations or more academic groupings. So they weren't set up for the small company. But around that time, more and more of these um, online teaching platforms were available to small companies such as my own. And so in 2019, we launched the Science Dog courses, which are a set of courses designed to train both pet professionals in many different fields. So we have a lot of trainers because, again, that's kind of was my niche for a long time. We have a lot of folks from the pet food industry, from small companies. We have a lot of undergrads, and also we have a lot of pet food retailers that come and take our courses. So we teach primarily small bite nutrition courses. We have a set of core courses that we call our masterclass program. And then we also teach, one of my favorite projects is we have a webinar series where we invite researchers, usually young researchers who are just getting started in their careers, to present their research to our students. So we have about 10 of those launched right now. They're on demand, so people can take them at any time. So the reason I said it was serendipitous was that literally it was the end of 2019 that we launched our first course, and then everything shut down in 2020. And so we had to shut down our dog training school, and we went completely online starting in 2020, and then it really grew from there. So we've been online now for almost 4 years.
Fantastic.
Corbion's Algaprine, DHA-P3, the algae-based omega-3 DHA to boost brain, cognition, immune system, and well-being. Adding it to pet food is easier than ever. Cut out the middle fish and go straight to the natural source to enjoy all the benefits of omega-3 DHA. It's better for the planet with zero impact on the ocean and low carbon footprint, and it's easy to use. The highly concentrated biomass powder is suitable for multiple applications. Learn more at corbion.com.
So, this is a very interesting path and business. What was your background that brought you to this business, Linda?
Oh gosh. I've been around for a little while, as you know, Kate. So I actually grew up in a family that was an animal family. I know you were a horse person from way back. I had a horse and a dog showing up and growing up. And my mom, believe it or not, was a dog trainer. And so we spent many wonderful years training and showing dogs together. And I did my undergraduate at Cornell. And when I decided I wanted to go to graduate school, I'm kind of a little embarrassed to say this on this podcast. I was actually interested in going to grad school for behavior and training, but at that time, it was the mid 80s. There were no programs. You know, today we have all these amazing dog labs that study social cognition in the dog and behavior and training, but those were non-existent back then. And so my advisor at Cornell, Skip Hintz, who was an amazing guy. He was a horse nutritionist, and so I went to see him, and he said, you know, Linda, a booming field, and he was so spot on. If you want to get a job and be employed, which I did, is animal nutrition. And if you're interested in dogs and cats, you should go either to UC Davis or to the University of Illinois. And so I applied both places. I got more money here, so I came to U of I, and I was really lucky because I did my master's in canine and feline nutrition, and I had some great mentors. I had George Fahey, who you've already interviewed, Gail Sarnecki, also Bob Easter. I kind of credit Bob and George with really teaching me the importance of being a good scientist and the importance of good critical thinking skills. They just were amazing mentors, and so was Gail. And also Diane Hirakawa and I overlapped here. So when Diane left to work for the IMS company, I was at that point teaching at U of I. Taught the companion animal program for a number of years. She hired me to write with her a canine and feline nutrition textbook. And that book was kind of the start of my science writing career. I found that I loved science writing. I went on to write a couple more textbooks for the companion animal program. And then I eventually did leave the U of I to consult full time. And I also had opened up a dog training school on some land that my husband and I bought. And that was taking a lot of my time. So then I spent a number of years, this is how you and I met, doing science writing for the industry. I was still writing primarily for scientists, for other scientists. So I was writing technical papers and white papers and some academic papers for publication. And so I was doing that and the training school. And then eventually, then, as I said, around 2014, was approached. And that was kind of my jump from just writing scientific papers and doing science writing for other scientists and other nutritionists to which I think feel like was a big jump to writing science writing for the general pet owner and for what I call like the high interest, high level pet owner and pet industry person, professional. And that jump started in 2014, and that brings us up to date for now.
That is an absolutely amazing journey, and if, I really have an affection towards really great mentors, and I totally fan out when I meet outstanding scientists, and you just named a litany of people, like, in that really high bracket of animal nutritionists that people have the opportunity to work for, and it changes their lives forever.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So lucky to have such a storied interaction that continues to this day. So I think too that you haven't really said this, but you're a very you're very, very great at networking and seeing different approaches and perspectives of people and drawing them in. And I've always, when I've worked with you directly, it's always been, and I don't mean easy in content, I mean easy in the process. So if anybody does reach out to you for a writing opportunity, I would fully endorse working with you. You're very lovely to work with in all respects,
Thank you. That's very sweet.
and a very strong scientist too. So that always helps when there's somebody who's really nice, on the other side when you're having a good scientific debate. So that's a lot of fun.
Yes.
So, really, what you do now is you are involved, if I was to kind of frame it up a little bit, in knowledge translation at multiple levels of end user. And so that might be other animal nutritionists, other people in the pet food industry. It could be the veterinarian, the veterinary technician, the paraprofessionals, whether that be the breeder, the trainer, the list goes on and on, or last but not least, the dog owner themselves. So, can you talk a little bit about how difficult and what you need to consider when you're communicating at those different levels, but with a similar message?
Yeah, it's a great question and one of my favorite topics. Um, because one of the things that I noticed working among dog trainers and the general dog owning population through our school was what I believed at the time, and I think exists, but is I think it's getting much better as you and I talked a little bit before we started today, is that there seemed to be a pretty big gap between all of this great research that was coming out from academics that was published in the academic journals that then didn't make it to the general public, didn't make it to knowledge that people could use and understand and say, well, this will make me select this particular food or feed my dog in this particular way. And also, I think it was very true in behavior and training. There's all this great research on social cognition in the dog that doesn't always trickle down into the dog trainer, even the professional trainer. And so that gap is what we try to to cover with the science dog, and with our courses. The problems, I think, for me personally, lie in the way that scientists speak, which I speak as a scientist, so I talk about the evidence supports this, or we don't have much evidence. We don't talk in terms of this is now proven or this is now disproven, as you know, as a scientist. Whereas the public often wants to just hear, don't feed grapes to your dogs because it will kill them. Rather than, well, we don't really know what's going on. And this is the evidence we have so far. This supports it. This doesn't support it, which is, again, the correct way for a scientist to speak, but it's not necessarily what people always want to hear. So I try with the science dog to always use that language, always use the evidence, and also be a good critical thinker in that all good scientists will include in their papers, these are the limitations of this study, which is again, it's good science. And so I will include those in our blog. Um, the problems that we see, and again, it's not often, but it happens, is people will say, well, it was only 14 dogs, or well, it was only a 3-week study. And they don't really have a good sense of what a good dog study is and find something to criticize. And not my response is, yeah, that's a limitation. But this is what we have, and this is the evidence that we have. So I guess in a nutshell, I'm trying to bring people up to think more like a scientist, and not to expect science to bring them, the answer once and for all. This is exactly what you should feed your dog, and this is why. Think like a critical thinker and try and make the best decision you can given the evidence that we have.
Yeah, no, that's really true, Linda, is that scientists have to be accepting of the answer, "It depends," and then use really the individual studies to piece together what parts of the equation that they fill. And that's very hard. I think that people often are looking for that, that pinnacle study. And there's really that might work for drug discovery, and that, that final drug study that they're doing in the target population, etc. But nutrition and metabolism is extraordinarily nuanced. And the fact that it's an environmental factor, in the genetics by environment interaction that we see, we have to acknowledge that it's only one. And if you don't tell me that you were feeding all those dogs at minus 30 degrees Celsius, as an example, then none of your feed intakes will make sense to me. They'll feel wrong. I won't understand why any dog could possibly eat that much. So there's all this kind of nuance in science that takes a tremendous amount of education, to really become comfortable with. And I don't think any of us who would say that we know everything. It's just continual learning. And the minute you realize that everyone is learning, and also on the communication end, then it becomes a lot more seamless. So when we think specifically, excuse me, looking at your work, what of you have a tremendous amount of courses. You've published numerous books. What was your favorite thing to work on, and why?
Ooh. Without a doubt, across the board, even it was a pretty well sold book, but wasn't my most highly sold book was Beware the Straw Man. And the reason was that book followed dog food logic, and it actually came, like many of my books have, it came out of a series of blogs, a series of essays in which I used a hypothetical story about a young woman and her border collie, and the fact that she wanted to find out if a certain, this isn't nutrition, but it's certainly related. She wanted to find out if a certain approach to training, priming was what she was testing, was whether or not priming works in dog training. And so I start out in the blogs. There's a series of blogs on the science dog, just telling her story and how she tested her theory in her single dog. And then we kind of take that and put critical thinking skills to it and say, well, is one dog not enough? What else could be explaining these results? And they were like, the dog matures. He was a young dog when she started. The dog is satiated, because it was a, a food treat experiment and a click and treat experiment. The dog was satiated one time she treated him, wasn't another. Just again, simply the passage of time. There are all these other factors that might have influenced the dog's response. So then we jump to, well, what is a group and why do you need a sample group? And there's a slide in my talk that shows her asking her friends, and she realizes I need a group of dogs to do this study. And so she asked her friends to bring their dogs, and then there's a slide of 15 border collies. And so then the idea of a representative sample size comes out. We talk about what is a representative sample and how that affects the conclusions you can make from a study. So it walks this young woman through all of these permutations of finally coming up with a well-controlled study with a representative sample size to test her theory. And I fabricate some data and show some graphs and things. And the whole purpose of that series is to show why we need science and why we need the scientific method per se. And I talk about this a lot in Dog Food Logic, is that we touched on it a little bit earlier, is that nutrition is a hard science. It is, it's based in biochemistry. And so we can measure things. But nutrition to dog owners doesn't feel like a hard science. It feels like emotion because we express love by feeding our dogs. It's a huge part of, it's a huge part of our own culture. And so it's hard, I think, to reconcile those two things, to put on our critical thinking caps, and not fall for things like, feed your dog strawberries and he'll live forever. Or if you feed this particular diet, your dog won't get cancer, because emotionally we're invested in that. We want to believe those things. And so with the science dog, with beware the straw man, I was trying to show, yes, we can and do love our dogs, but we can help them the best by being critical thinkers and using evidence-based science to make decisions for them. So that's where that book came out of, and then it goes on to give a lot of examples of why science is needed for for health related and nutrition related, in my view, many things related decisions that we make for our dogs. And each essay kind of gives an example of that. So that was, I think, by far my favorite to write, and I may even go back and do a second edition of it because it's definitely my favorite book.
Interesting. Well, I've already written it down because I have not read it. And it sounds very interesting. So I look forward to reading that and then chatting to you about it again. It sounds like a very interesting approach to enable knowledge translation. It's interesting to me because a couple of weeks ago, I talked to Dr. Jason Coe he's a colleague of mine here at the University of Guelph, and he does veterinary communications. And he also, in a couple of places, mentioned the importance of storytelling, and also allowing the people that you're trying to target with your knowledge translation, interviewing them and understanding what they understand, how they perceive science, how they perceive what they're being communicated to. And that can be really honing in on how we translate this knowledge is critical in ensuring that people follow along, especially when the science is quite definitive. Um, so I think I just love your business, and I absolutely see the role of knowledge translation. So I did not warn you at all, and I'm always intrigued with knowledge translation as to what's coming. And I can tell on, I'll maybe throw the marketers under the bus here, that I can tell that a lot of the marketing bits and pieces, I've run them through and they test positive for AI writing tools. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind commenting on where you see AI writing tools coming in to our knowledge translation at any point, because this would be a game changer
Yes, I
if,
agree.
and I think we should both acknowledge that, at least for me, ChatGPT is what I occasionally go to see what's happening and run anything to see if it's AI generated, and it gets science kinda wrong. It has a real
Yes,
hard time.
it has a funny voice when it tries to do science. Yeah,
It does. It can't weigh the nuances. That's what I'm picking up on.
yeah,
So it can't say, "Oh, this design was like this with these outcomes, that's why these look like this," versus this other study where the dogs were heavier and they were of a different breed, and therefore the results look like this, as an example,
yeah,
kinda
sure.
throwing it out. But what do you think about tools like ChatGPT in the pet care world?
Yeah, I haven't personally used it, but, on my blog, it comes up all the time. "Do you want to use AI in this?" I personally think that it's at least at its present state, I'm sure it's going to get better. I think it's relatively easy to tell that it's not a person. I've had a number of comments on blog essays that clearly are ChatGPT or, a bot of some type or a AI of some type because it doesn't sound like a person. That's the only, and also in these cases, it's basically just reiterated and put back together what was in the blog, and it tries to be very complimentary, so you fall for it. I do have a funny story with that. I volunteer every Friday at our local soup kitchen, and one of our fellow volunteers, we've become a very close group, is a retired journalist, and he was a journalist in economics and also in economics and unions. And so he's still very active in his field, and he still writes for their national journal. He's the editor. So he went to their annual conference. This is probably 6 months ago, and he wrote himself for their journal a review of the conference, and then he had one of the chat GPTs, and I think he has the higher level because there's different levels you can get. He had that. He put the right, whatever you do with the words you put in, and he had it write the same article. And then he gave me both articles and said, "Can you tell which one is me?" And I instantly could tell because he's kind of a sardonic, funny guy, and I could tell his voice in the actual one that was his. But it was actually quite good, the one that the AI one. So when I went back to him and said, "I think this is the one you did," he said, "Yeah, that's right." And he said he picked out several names in the AI generated one, and he said, "These are fabricated. It just made up names of professors, and they were actually like, Doctor So and So at University of Guelph and actual universities." He said it just made them up and said things about their theories, and he said they don't exist. They don't even exist. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah, that was my response exactly. Yeah. I personally, I have not had, I haven't used it at all, and really don't intend to, because I enjoy writing, and I just have not. But I have noticed it in comments on some of the blogs.
Yeah, I think the writing trails far behind. I can tell you, I don't know if you're involved anymore in data management and statistical analysis, but if you need to find the error in your SAS or your R code, Chat GPT, boom, it's going to be right there right away. Absolutely amazing with
That
code.
is amazing.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah. So if anybody's not using it for code now, you're just wasting time. Just try. Yeah, you should understand everything yourself, but when you're looking for that comma that you can't see because your eyes are failing you, and you need it out of your SAS code because it buggers everything up, it'll pick it up among other things. So
That's neat.
it
That's very
is
cool.
good for a few things. So I do understand and am very excited about this because I too have been involved quite a bit in alternative ingredients for, well, quite frankly, the entire food industry. But you are working on a course based on plant-based foods for dogs, and I did not ask before, and cats, or just dogs?
We're sticking to dogs. We do have some cat courses at the Science Dog. We have 3 core courses: basics, feeding through the life cycle, and dog food smarts, and those kind of make up our master's class program. And again, I should iterate, these are not academic programs. They are for continuing education for um, mainly pet professionals, such as trainers, breeders. We get a lot of small retail shops sending their staff. So it's not, when we say master's class program, that's just using that very popular title for online programs that are a little more in depth. That's our master's class program. And then we really had a lot of interest in raw based diets, of course, and my interest, just because it's such a booming field, is a plant-based food. So we're adding specialties. They're a little bit smaller courses because those are pretty big courses, our core courses. So we're adding 3 specialties to that. The first will be the plant-based foods, the second raw-based foods, and the third homemade diets. And so we're working right now on the plant-based foods, and it's really fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of good research available, certainly more than there was pre TCM issue. So it's benefited from that. Traditionally, as if we said plant-based diet, we thought soybean and corn. And now we've got all these newcomers that, yeah, they're newcomers, but there's some good research behind them, some of your own research, of course. So we're concentrating on that, just to show what's possible, what nutrients to be aware of, how to select a diet. We're doing an entire scan of that industry, and going to provide different companies and different sources of foods, of the plant-based foods. So hopefully that one will be popular. We've had a lot of interest in doing more than just the 3 cores in our webinars. So it was kind of time to start to add another course with a little more meat to it, if you will.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. So, when you think about plant-based foods in general, and speaking to the industry who may be interested in developing these alternative diets for dogs, I always have to ask. I have my own opinion on it as well, but when we start talking about foods, rather than plant-based, I'm going to say that eliminate animal-based ingredients. I'll take that different route. Where do these novel ingredients that we're getting approval on now, like black soldier fly larvae, like cricket, where do insects fall? Can you use them in a plant-based diet?
I think that's a great question. And actually, that course, even though technically it's called plant based foods, we are including a chapter on insect based. And I think that's, again, one of the things that we strive for with the science dog, as I know you know about us, is that we are not. We are completely independent. We're not funded by a pet food company or or insect based protein supplier. So, the way we start that course, because as I'm sure you know, just as raw based feeding is a very emotionally laden topic, God knows why, but it is. So is plant based feeding. So I get, I get feedback, positive and not positive, from each end. And for some people, feeding plant-based foods to dogs seems to be a personal offense to them. And so what we talk about in the very first lectures is there's no value judgment here. These are the facts about why, given your surveys that came out of your lab, actually, why people may be choosing. And we've got data on it. It's self reported, yeah, but it's data saying this is why I want to feed this to my dog. And these are the percentages. This is why people are saying, I want to at least feed some plant based food to my dogs. It might not even be totally vegan. It might just be I want to increase how much plant based food he consumes. So, in that respect, so from that standpoint, we are including a chapter on insect-based foods or insect-based proteins for those who do draw the line. Because some would say, no, it's an animal, it's an insect. No, it's a no-go. It's got to be all plant sourced. But some will say, I can go with larva. That's okay. So we're including it there just to cover that one, and also as an alternative protein source that is sustainable. A big issue is, again, as you know, is that a fair number, especially our younger dog owners, are saying, I want to select a protein source or a food that is more sustainable. And so, most of the evidence, not all the evidence, suggests that insect-based proteins are more sustainable environmentally. So that's another reason that we're including it in that course.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that I think that sometimes people forget that globally, we all have different approaches to food. And that's not just what we eat, it's also how we eat, it's our relationship with food. It is very, very complex, and it's part of what we need to respect. It's part of culture, it's part of religion. Whether you agree with those things, those are all personal choices that we make. And when we're serving an entire sector, we have an obligation to explore all of those avenues and try to flesh them out uh, for the industry to understand. And this is frankly one place that I wish that the industry wouldn't be trying to make points of differentiation on. It really is confusing to the consumer when the number one question from a pet owner is, what is the best food on the market?
Oh my gosh, I know.
Yeah.
A longer, healthier lifespan for our pets. That is EW Nutrition's target. With immunoglobulins, that target is within reach. IGY are a young generation technology platform, an innovative solution that has been tried and tested over the last decades and can now yield tangible benefits. Immunoglobulins from egg yolk improve the animal's response to pathogens in the gut or in the mouth. They're easy to administer, they're perfectly safe, and they just work. Made with passion, proven with science.
I try to teach my students. I'm sure I've said this in a podcast before, and I'd like to know how you address this. But I ask the students. I do my background in my first class of pet nutrition, and then I say, "All right, let's have a fun discussion. You all have opinions. You've been involved in parts of the industry, but most certainly, you are all dog owners or cat owners." "What do you think I feed?" And usually they go so I give them 7 minutes the first time, and then they come back, and this was actually the first year, so my reputation must be preceding me. A group of students, as soon as I asked the question, they said, "Sorry, Dr. Schleber, we can't answer that question. You haven't given us sufficient information." I was like, "Yes! You asked me more questions," right? So that's really important, and then I start talking to them about the questions they need to ask others, especially if they're gonna be the one that's giving advice,
Yes,
whether
exactly, exactly, yeah.
you can go from the veterinarian to the breeder on this, right? If you don't understand where someone's perspective is coming from and you give them a suggestion that doesn't resonate with their own moral stance, you've
Exactly.
already
Yeah.
lost the discussion. So I think it's a really important thing to think about. So let's get down into this plant based a little bit more and a couple of things maybe that you have learned. You know a tremendous amount about nutrition. So things like processing can both improve and also damage an ingredient. We will go beyond that kind of work, but what were the 5 most interesting things that you learned while you were putting this course together about either people who want to feed plant-based foods to their dogs or plant-based foods?
Sure, sure. Well, first, the course is about a third ready, so so I do not pronounce to be an expert at all yet, but I'm learning. I'm on the learning curve, and first and foremost, because I just finished this chapter, was on the all the survey work. Much of which came out of your lab, is that across the board, almost 100% of people who choose, especially a vegan diet for their dog, are vegetarian or vegan themselves. Not surprising, that they choose that, and a small number. It's actually fairly very odd for someone who's not vegan themselves to then select that for their dog. So, but I think one of the estimates, it was somewhere, if we're um, to just give it a wide range. I think it was between 5 and 10%. 10% was the highest of owners in these surveys that were at least interested in a plant-based food. And one of the reasons we're going with plant-based food is the same reason that term has become popular in the human realm. And again, as whatever happens in human nutrition trickles down after a few years into dog nutrition. And it's because it's less restrictive in many ways. It says just increase the number of plants or plant-based foods that you want to feed yourself or your dog. And for those who are doing it because of sustainability, that's a really nice option for them. They're not saying I'm going to feed my dog a vegan food. I may just add a plant-based food into the mix of foods that I give him. So that's why we went with that, is that we want to give that basically that broad umbrella versus a narrow. So that was the first thing that we learned, was that it's mainly vegetarians or vegans themselves. Not surprising, but the 10% value, if you actually look at, what is it, 75 million owned dogs in the United States. Well, 10% of that is a lot of dogs. It's 7 million dogs. So it's still a lot of pet owners who are at least considering it and thinking about it. And most of those surveys did not ask about insect based protein, but there is one. I wrote about this in the blog a while back, one study that looked at interest. And of course, again, we all know this, the ick factor is high on why people would reject an insect based protein diet. But so that, again, I don't have anything to speak to that in the course yet, but it would be interesting to see where those numbers lie as well. And the other thing that I think, again, because I'm trying to translate to pet owners and various types of pet professionals, some who may or may not have a nutrition background, is the idea of processing, because we're in an age of decreasing how much processing is done. But with a plant based diet, because of the anti nutritional factors, because of carbohydrates, you have to cook a plant-based diet. It has to be processed. I would even venture that it'd be hard to make a homemade diet. We can, but I think they have to be cooked, and we have to make sure that the anti-nutritional factors in the various pulses and legumes that are used are denatured. So that's another point that we make very strongly, because we've got such a strong raw food based group of pet owners that they may just think, well, I can do the same thing with a plant based diet. Well, you most certainly cannot. And the other thing I think that would add is that this isn't a bad thing, but it's just a fact is that when you feed a plant source protein and a plant based diet, it is almost across the board going to have lower digestibility values than a high meat based diet that's a high quality. And that's because of the carbs and the resistant starches and the fibers that come along with it, which again can be a good thing. As you know, as many that know more than I do about the microbiome know that's a good thing. So, but it's something I think that's important to bring up because there's this belief there's this belief in the dog owning population and definitely among trainers that the better a food is, the less your dog poops. And down to basically then they shouldn't poop at all at some point. And we know that's wrong. We need a healthy microbiome and a healthy gut, and we need normal defecation. So we can't go too far the other way in terms of digestibility values. So this idea of a food having a slightly higher or slightly lower digestibility value is antithetical to how many people think they should select a good diet. But I would argue that no, it's just a factor of a plant-based food. It's just going to come along with it.
Yeah, and that total dietary fiber can be formulated to and understood as well to understand what's available to the animal, that digestibility largely accounts to, but it means that that due diligence has to be done. And so I think that your course, and I don't want to go into details because I think it's important for anybody on this call who um, is considering either being a manufacturer of a plant-based diet or professionals that are considering starting to advise plant-based diets. It's very, very important to understand that what you're doing, and your course is one of many that starts to fill that knowledge gap for companies and professionals. And I think that it would be wise one day too to extend that to the consumer, because as you said, this generation, and as you go kind of down in age, vegetarianism and veganism just goes up.
Hmm. Yeah,
So it's not a judgment, it's an observation. And to your point, those are the people who also are starting to ask about these options for their pets, and see themselves as the guardian for their pet and the guardian for the planet. And that's an important role. And I really love the idea of, if we each did a small something small to improve the situation we're in, think about the monumental change we can make. So I love this idea. And I have one last question just because I'm horribly interested. Did is do vegetarians and vegans, they assume that mushrooms are
oh
plants?
yes, I believe so.
It's interesting only because
That's a very good point. Yeah,
their genotype's closer to ours than it is to a
that's
plant's.
very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's so many of them.
Yeah, and that's why I'll be interested to hear, because again, the surveys that I've seen on insect-based protein has been more about the yuck factor than,
Yeah.
oh, than they had that they're an animal or an insect, that they're a living being, versus a not, a plant. So I'd be interested to see as they become more popular, where that research goes in terms of what the perception of owners is.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see as we kind of move along, and I think it's gonna, when food prices start to increase, that will increase their feed prices as well, whether you call it pet food or pet feed or animal feed. Um, I th I wonder if when things get more expensive, an insect meal becomes more affordable, whether that will be the tipping point
Sure.
for people to get over their ick factor. It's gonna be, the future is always interesting and unknown.
Yes, I agree.
Well, thank you for covering your business and knowledge translation. I've really, really enjoyed this, and usually at the end, I ask a couple, softer questions, And I'm going to rephrase the question I almost ask everyone because I am well aware that you have quite a few dogs. So, my next question is, do you also have cats?
We do. We have a wonderful cat. We have Pete the cat, and he is a formerly feral cat, who we really thought we were going to trap because we live out in the country, so we get feral cats. He showed up, gosh, 12 years ago, and we trap neuter released him. We thought, we're never going to have him in the house. He's totally wild. And then we put a little igloo up for him outside. It was winter time after we had neutered him, and we were worried about him, so we put an igloo, a heated igloo home for him, and he stayed in there for a while, and then he slowly came into our mudroom, long story short, he is the best. We've always had cats, and he's the best cat we've ever had. He's our 3rd dog. He's just a wonderful boy. So, yes, so we have Pete, and he gets along with our dogs, always has, so.
So he's kind of a cat dog.
Yes. Well, if we let him when we walk the dogs on the road, he does still, I hate to say this, but he does go out occasionally. We don't like him to, but, again, he was feral, so he scoots out and, he just stays right around the house. But if we walk the dogs, he comes along for walks, and which again, we worry about because we don't want him on the road, but he's very much considers himself part of the family.
Oh, that's amazing, Linda. He sounds like a funny I knew another Pete the cat as well. I think there's some Pete the cat books out there for
There
anybody.
are. I'm embarrassed to say we didn't know about the books when we named them. We just thought it was a good name.
I knew another cat. He was a white cat. He was deaf as well. So he was a deaf Pete the cat, and he was, a character, very funny. He totally benefited from not being able to hear anything because they had this obnoxious smaller dog in the house that just wouldn't shut up. So and Pete didn't care at all.
Yeah.
Pet food palatability, pet nutrition, and pet food protection are critical concerns all around the world. That is why so many pet food manufacturers rely on our mastery in providing these 3 essential components. At Simrise Pet Food, we offer pet food manufacturers what they need to deliver the quality consumers demand for the pets in their family. Beyond high-value ingredients, we deliver expert support and comprehensive capabilities to help them grow or strengthen their business. Contact us today to know more about our products and services or visit petfood.simrise.com. That's petfood.simrise.com.
Okay, so one last question for you, because I have in the past connected some students with you that are really good writers. And if an undergraduate or graduate students are thinking about getting into scientific writing and knowledge translation, what is your advice for them?
Oh, goodness. Um, I th Personally, and this is actually definitely a personal opinion, is to start in academia because I really don't think you can become a good science writer. And again, I think I was just in the right place at the right time when I met Diane, and she and Dan needed someone to, translate a lot of the research that the IMS company was doing at the time. They didn't have writers. Because I think if you start in the more marketing, public realm, it's harder to go deep than it is to go the opposite way. I mean, for me anyway, I had then the background of having the rigor of having taken data and taken the original research and say make writing an academic paper. So for your students, I think they're well suited for that because they're going to come out of your program having published some papers. And then there are several avenues. I'm not sure there are avenues you can make a living at because there are so many. Journalism is a tough field these days, and in science, journalism is no different. But there are a number of publications and magazines that really do want good dog, cat, of all realms, health, nutrition, behavior training, writers, and that you can at least do that freelance. My personal feeling is I'm not a marketing writer. I don't write fluff, and I'm not interested in writing fluff. And so I think that true science writing is a more narrow field and a little more difficult to get into. But I wouldn't dissuade anyone from doing it at all because I think it's very well needed, and especially in this day and age when there's so many myths out there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And thank you for all of your efforts in educating the sector and working with every part of the sector. It cannot be easy. And for that, thank you very much for that part too, Linda.
Oh, thank you, Kate. It's been a delight, as always, chatting with you.
Yeah, and thanks for everything today. And if anyone wants to reach out to Linda, you can go and visit the Science Dog. It quite literally is thesciencedog.com. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for listening, and thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Kate.